Welcome. I'm Adam Miller, a consultant with the Art of Applying and a graduate of the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. Today we're going to be talking about why it is not necessary to do your applications to graduate school in sequential order. And what I mean by that is some people think that first they should do the GMAT or GRE, second they should do all of their school research, third they should start to reach out to current students and alumni, fourth they should write those essays, and fifth they should get those letters of recommendation. And what I want to go through today are 4 major things that we hear from some of our clients, and then a reason or 2 for each of those as to why it does not make sense to do these things sequentially necessarily. So let's jump in to reason number 1. Number 1, once I know what test scores I get, then I'll know which caliber of schools I can apply to. No. Instead, what you should do is make a really long list of all the schools you might be interested in. And then as you do your research, as you talk to current students, as you attend admissions webinars, as you do your online research, then you'll hopefully come down to a reasonable number of programs to apply to. In the case of business schools or policy schools, usually we recommend between 5 to 7 at the Art of Applying. Unfortunately, we sometimes hear from our clients and even our potential clients that if they don't hit their target test scores, they won't bother with the rest of their applications to graduate school. This doesn't make a ton of sense because if you are working with a coach at a place like the Art of Applying, then you can actually not only get help from us tactically to improve those scores, you can also get a more tailored, specific calibration of what we think your chances are along the way. And so to really hammer home this point, let's take a quick break and hear from one of our successful clients, Lauren, as she explains how she got into Wharton, Kellogg, Yale SOM, Anderson, and Stern on this very point. And then we'll come back and briefly wrap this part of the video up and move on to the second reason for why it doesn't make so much sense to try to do everything sequentially.
As you know, we start all of our calls with celebration. And what I would like to celebrate today is the many schools that you've been admitted to, the great offers you have, and please tell us about them.
Sure. So I applied to 7 schools, got into 5 of them. So I got into Wharton. I got into Yale with a $90K Forte Fellowship. I got into NYU Stern with a full ride. I got into UCLA with a full consortium fellowship, and then I recently got into the Kellogg Triple M program.
So let's talk about the waiting too long to apply or whatnot. How did you find the Art of Applying? When did you find us, and what resonated with you that made you reach out?
Yeah, so I had been seeing you guys on Facebook for a while, but I never really did further research. And then when I finally decided that I wanted to go back to school, I decided to reach out. I think it was after I bombed my first GMAT. So I was like, I need some help. I don't know what I'm doing with this application process. I feel kind of lost. So that's what prompted me to reach out to you guys.
Okay, great. I actually love that you reached out after you bombed your first GMAT because so many people feel like they need to have the perfect or really strong GMAT score before they reach out to get help. And then they spend so much time of their application process toiling alone or with a tutor when we could really have been working together earlier.
In my case, I took the GMAT twice. And the first time, yes, all I did was I studied and studied and studied for the GMAT. But before I took it the second time, something I did was extremely motivating for me in that process. And that was I started to email and set up calls with current students and even a couple of alums at some of the schools I was excited about. This was really motivating for me because as I started to hear from them, those stories of grad school and the kinds of jobs they'd got afterwards, those were the things that made me want to keep doing all those quantitative and verbal problems on the GMAT after I was clocking out of my day job at the time. So if you can, definitely start the process as early in the season as possible. And it's okay to not wait until you've put a lid on the GMAT or on the GRE before you start moving on to other parts of the application. And doing that kind of research, I would consider to be an essential part of the application. Reason number 2 as to why you don't need to do everything sequentially when you're applying to graduate school. And that's that you might never hit your target test score. In my case, my goal was to get a 700 or better on the GMAT, but I never got that score. And at the same time, I was able to get into a top 15 program with a scholarship, and I loved it. So how did I do that? Well, I moved on to other parts of my application, and I wrote some awesome essays because I talked to several students, I talked to several alums, and I just did my homework so clearly as I was interviewing and as I'm sure when they read in my essays. And so you've got to figure out, certainly by the time you graduate from a top program anyways, how to decide when it's time to move on to the next thing. You can't be a perfectionist at a really large, impactful organization as a leader and not learn how to delegate, not learn how to say, this is good enough, and not learn how to say, all right, I'm going to go ahead and focus on whatever other things I think I'm actually going to be able to excel at. So let's hear for about 5 minutes from our founder and CEO, Kanisha, on this very topic, as she got in 10 years ago to the Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Business School with a very similar story.
You are more than a test score. And I came up with that affirmation because I want to remind you that the GRE, the GMAT, the executive assessment, the MCAT, the LSAT is a number. Okay, it's a number that does have some meaning, but it's a meaning that you can decide what it means. And it's also a number that, of course, schools use as one factor to evaluate your candidacy. But I think a pitfall that a lot of applicants can fall into, whether they are really strong standardized test takers or whether they identify as so-called bad test takers, or if they just hate the test, or if they're scattered, sometimes they do well, sometimes they don't, they can really overemphasize not only the importance of the test to their ability to get into their dream school, but they can also overemphasize what the test means about them. Okay, so what I want you all to know is I'm one of the scattered people. In high school, when I took the SAT, I did really, really well. So on the, I think, 1,600 point system, I had a combined score between verbal and quantitative. I had a 1450, I believe, if you put my highest verbal and my high, and that's so funny that I even remember that. That shows how much importance I put on those tests. And my score was so high, I received the National Achievement Scholarship, which is an award given to the highest scoring African-American test takers in the country. So it's similar to National Merit Scholarship. And then they break it down for National Achievement for African-Americans, National Hispanic Scholarship for Hispanic test takers, and the National Merit includes everybody. And that was really cool. And so that made me feel really happy. I carried that confidence and that over-identification with the test into college. And when it was time to apply to graduate school, I self-studied, and I only gave myself time to take the test one time, which I do not recommend. I think you should give yourself enough time to take whatever your required standardized test score is 3 times before you submit your application. If you can't take it 3, at least 2 times before you submit, and then 1 time after you submit, but before you will have heard back from your schools, so that if you get waitlisted, you can provide them with an updated score. But I digress. Let's come back to this idea that I am more than a test score. You are more than a test score. So anyway, I only gave myself the opportunity to take the GMAT 1 time, and I self-studied. And this is my senior year of college. For end of first semester, I'm at home in Austin, Texas. I go to take the test, and my score pops up on the screen. And everybody, it is the exact same score that I had taken that I received on my diagnostic test. before I had done all these months of self-study, I had not improved even 1 point from my diagnostic test to the day that I took the test. And that score was not an amazing score. It was a 620. So for those of you who have taken the GMAT and are aiming for those super fancy schools like Harvard, Wharton, Yale, Cornell, whatever, you know that 620 is not a great score. And I was like, oh man, well, that's the score I got, and that's what I'm applying with. And of course, as you can see from my 2 Harvard degrees and my big Harvard banner, I did get into Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School. And I actually even graduated with second-year honors from Harvard Business School, which means I was the top 20% of students, even though I had a test score that probably put me in the bottom 25% of admitted students. So what does all this mean? All this means is that, yes, the test matters. It matters because it's an element of many elements that will be considered for your application, but it is not the only thing that matters. And this is not a test of your intelligence. This is not a test of your worth as a human being. This is a test of how well you can take the test. I would argue it's not even a test of how well you will do in graduate school, because I was in the 49th percentile for quantitative on the GMAT, but I graduated with second-year honors from Harvard Business School, arguably the best business school in the world, or if I want to be a little less arrogant, one of the best business schools in the world.
Point number 3 as to why you should not wait until you've absolutely demolished your test score before moving on to the rest of your application. And that is that if you only think that doing a bunch of practice tests over and over again until you get within that range of that target score of yours is going to be sufficient for you to sit down and take a real exam, then you may never actually find that you're going to be successful. I know when I was taking the exams, I was scoring in the low 600s before I sat down the first time to take the GMAT. But I ended up scoring in above 650 range. I think it was a 670. And so, boom, I gained an additional 50 points because maybe there was just so much time pressure, or maybe because those online resources or those textbooks that I was studying out of just weren't realistic enough to the real experience. At the end of the day, all that matters, obviously, is what score you submit to an admissions committee when you sat down and paid for the dang thing. So don't wait too long before you sit down and do that. To really bring this point home, what I want to do is share a video from another one of our clients, Nikki, as she tells the story of how she went from having a 480 on the first time she took her test to getting into Chicago Booth after working with The Art of Applying.
So Nikki, I would love to just hear from you about, to speak to people listening and watching about the importance of starting early and thinking about and reaching out for help early.
Mm-hmm. I think, so the thing about reaching out early is it gives you time to pivot. So especially when you're looking at our world right now, right? When you think about something like coronavirus, obviously that affects everybody. But the lesson is that life changes. And so the fact that we reached out, even in Greg's case, he reached out early. In my case, I think Kanisha was like, you reached out too early. Can you just wait, wait a second? But I think what it does is it allows you that time to be really self-reflective and clear on your goals. And so you end up applying to the right places. You end up putting more effort into, more efficient effort, let's say, into the things that you do. And then you're allowed to pivot. I mean, the fact now that I can go to MBA next year and I'm not somebody who's now at this point in the year scrambling to get an application in for these round 4, round 5, round 6s that are happening, it's really valuable. And, if this hadn't been the right thing, I still would have had time to keep refining my dream because I started early. So I wouldn't wait because it's a long process.
And I feel like a lot of the MBA application process is about fit, right? So the more time you have, the more time you can understand yourself and the schools and really assess fit and build that into your application.
Yeah.
Finally, let's turn to reason number 4 why it's so important to probably mix and match which things within your application you're going to be working on in any given week or any given month of the process. And the best way to exemplify this is to turn to one of our clients, Miguel, who absolutely hit the GMAT out of the park, but he needed a ton of help with his essays. Right? He got a 760 and had a 3.7 GPA in undergrad. So his numbers are fantastic. But if he would have spent too much time studying for that standardized test score and not enough time working with the art of applying on improving his essays, then he might not have gotten in to his dream schools.
What advice would you give to other maybe Spanish applicants or other international applicants or other people coming from your industry who have a really strong GMAT score maybe, but still need help? Just speak to some of those people. What advice, encouragement, or insight would you provide to them?
For me, it's. I think that the MBA, I slightly underestimated the competitiveness of the process at first. And I thought my stats were more than enough to kind of drive me through the whole process. And I soon realized when I started talking to other friends that their essays and their stories, even though they had slightly less powerful stats, were much more powerful than mine. And that's when I started thinking about how to frame a story that made sense. So basically my advice is telling them that the process is much more holistic and comprehensive than it seems at first, and that it requires a lot of thinking and introspection and kind of self-awareness, that it's not always achievable by yourself, but a lot of times you need help because it's a lengthy process. It takes a lot of time, and second opinions and people who can help you accelerate your efforts are key in being able to hit your targets. So all in all, it's don't undermine the process, and just I highly recommend seeking for help, because these people, consultants, know what the process is like. They've been through it a few times, and they can help you make the most out of your stats and capabilities and background.
To wrap up today's video, let me just give you 3 quick takeaways. Number 1, hopefully you can start the process as soon as possible. Number 2, don't think that you have to be done with whatever standardized test you're taking before you start doing a little bit of research or even start touching your essays for whatever programs you're applying to. And lastly, ask for help. Ask your friends that you trust, family that you trust, coworkers that you trust, and of course, consultants like those at the Art of Applying that you trust. So that is it for today's video. Hopefully you found it informative and at least a little bit entertaining. If you want any help with your applications to business schools, policy schools, law schools, any other kind of graduate schools, we've got people here who can help you. So reach out to us at theartofapplying.com.